Hey there! In this video episode of Herald Tribune World Youth Forum, presenting their speeches at United Nations. It's really impressive that this teenager's showing amazing skills and courage in United Nations stage. Let's move to the video and watch them. Presenter of the discussion is Mrs. Helen Height-Waller. The Conquest of Prejudice.
This year's forum delegates had arrived at Idlewild Airport. Some of their misconceptions about the United States began to appear, and then within a very few days, when they got to know each other well enough, some of their equally fantastic misconceptions about each other's countries began to come out. Still, it was a complete surprise when one day, weeks later, Saroj from Thailand said quite casually in a conversation that in Thailand, when people talk about Westerners, they never refer to us as he or she, but simply as it. Suddenly, the implications of this dawned on us. How Thai children, from the time they're able to talk, unconsciously get the idea that white people are, well, neuter, something less than men and women, not quite as human as they are. We talked more about it, and Bjorn from Iceland admitted that the only people he'd ever hated were the Turks. Because whenever he was naughty, his mother said a Turk would come and take him, and since he was naughty very often, he developed almost a hysterical fear of the Turks. Then Patsy from the Philippines says that it was different in the Philippine Islands. There, when a child won't eat her vegetables, it's an Indian Sikh that comes and steals them in a small bag. Well, this discussion from there on, the roots of prejudice, has been going on for weeks and weeks. But just a few days ago, when we all got together to try to plan for today's program, there was another surprise. We suddenly discovered that we'd stopped talking about the roots of prejudice, and we're talking about the conquest of prejudice. So I've asked the four students, as you see, from Thailand, Malaya, Greece, and Denmark, to help us in this discussion, and I'm going to ask Susie from Brazil. Will you start the ball rolling, Susie?
I came to the United States 3 months ago with great reservations. I would be a Brazilian tourist in America, and I was afraid I would behave in the same way American tourists do in Brazil. I was also afraid of not being accepted by people, because Americans in foreign countries very often keep to themselves in their own little communities. Looking back, I can see that all the delegates must have felt the same problem, and even much more than I. Just imagine you were an Asian girl who had been taught that modesty and silence are great virtues, and suddenly find yourself transported to a place where children are brought up to claim their rights in loud voices. Or imagine you were an African or an Asian coming here for the first time in their lives and knowing that Americans discriminate against Negroes and Asiatics. For you must realize how much these facts about America are headlining the rest of the world. Nearly all, our fears were unfounded. Right from the moment we stepped on American soil, we felt at home. First a week at Sarah Lawrence College together. Then the host families, friendly and with a sense of humor. I guess they needed it to put up with us. We went to school every day, came home at 3 p.m., did our homework, ate dinner, watched TV like real Americans. Occasional parties, maybe babysitting. Just imagine, 50 cents an hour for doing nothing. And, of course, the continuous yakking with our hosts about any subject, yes, any subject at all. We've really gotten to know the Americans, a large-hearted people with an exceptional ability to laugh at themselves.
What about your relations with each other, Susie?
The most astonishing thing was the casual miracle that made us. We were 34 nationalities, cultures, and the background into one big family. Of course, there were some shocks at first. I come from a very religious country, and I was horrified at Moen's statement that people in Denmark just don't care so much about religion. Sami from Korea was shocked at John's rather rude interruptions of Mrs. Waller. Swan from Malaya was shocked at seeing American boys actually kissing girls in public. Ibrahim from Lebanon, on the other hand, just can't understand how Sangmi is ever going to get married if she isn't allowed to have dates in Korea. Soon enough, all these turned into amusing memories, and we became what we intend to remain for the rest of our lives, friends. It's not just a happy-go-lucky, come-as-may-come friendship either. This opportunity we had of being able to talk to each other about the world's problems and about our own troubles, which are, of course, much more important, about literature, art, and about plain nonsense. To be angry with each other and happy and sad makes us more than friends. We are brothers and sisters. In 3 days, we'll be going back to our countries, and the family will spread out all over the world. So the feelings of hate or mistrust or indifference we feel towards a certain country, you have to compete with the love we feel for a member of the foreign family that lives there.
Thanks very much, Susie. Now, just for fun, I kept a copy of what every one of you said 3 months ago when I asked you what your image of America was on arrival. Swan, Lehop Swan from Malaya, would you be a good sport and admit to us now some of the things you said then?
Well, I thought that America was a land of reckless people, irresponsible, indifferent, ambitious, and too materialistic-minded. Before I came, I believed that Americans drive in big cars at about 100 miles an hour through the busiest streets, and that they don't care whether they knock down anyone or not. I also thought that American teenagers, well, had no cares or duties, that they did just what they wanted all day long, and they had fun all the time. I also thought that they were rather light-headed. That was the impression I got from the movies, and that they gave way to their passions very easily.
Do you think we were like any resemblance between us and the British?
Well, I hadn't actually met Americans, so I thought that they were more or less like the English, the British, I mean, and that therefore they were very snobbish. I thought that they thought too much of themselves, and that religion played no part in their daily lives, that they were hard-hearted, self-centered, and that whatever they did, they had a very selfish reason for it. You see, I had never had any contact with American people before, and the things that I really know now about the people here after 3 months are so completely opposite to what I thought I knew when I first came that I blush when I have to admit that I ever said them at all.
Let's get a couple more. Trivo from Yugoslavia, what was your image of America when you arrived? Go to the mic, will you?
I think that in Yugoslavia we have a correct picture of American way of life. When I thought about America, I thought about the Smith, the Taft-Hartley Act, the law that changed labor policy in many important angles, the Smith law against the communists, the Arthur Miller incident, and about the attitude against the Red China.
Yes, Saraj from Thailand, how about you?
In my country, the teenagers show their greatest respect to their parents and teachers. We can't show our rude manners to them. We can't consider them to be our playmates. We can't stare at them. We can't start to eat until they do, and we can't touch their heads. And when we come into a room where an older person is sitting, we have to bend down very low so that our heads will never be higher than theirs. And we think that the way you dance is rather rude, not just only rock and roll. And most of the parents in my country, they do not allow their daughters to learn your way of dancing when they are still teenagers, because they consider it bad to let a man catch them. Now, after these 3 months, I know a lot more about the Americans, and I understand them much better than I ever did in my life. And now I don't think anymore that the teenagers are very bad, very lazy, and very rude. And about rock and roll, when I first tried, I came to like it suddenly. Back home in my country, when we see anyone walking with his head bending out, we make fun of him by saying he just came from abroad. But now I realize that walking here is like that because the weather is so cold, so that you have to bend your head down. I'm sure that when I get back home, I'll be changed so much that my parents will be shocked. I won't be so shy anymore, and maybe I'll always like to have the discussions with my friends.
Oh, you're not the only one, Cyrus. I can just imagine the look on my parents' faces when I come home in a loud shirt and say, have a ball.
It's really funny how all of us have changed. I remember how convinced I was about some of my values when I first came here. And, for example, that the intellectual values were so much higher than any of the others. Now I can't even see how we can ever classify values. I've seen that every valuation depends entirely on the individual.
Well, the more I think of it, the more I arrive to the point where every idea seems to be a prejudice, because we can never know what is right and wrong. Therefore, I reached the conclusion that the only thing we have got to do is to stick to the golden mean and avoid extremes.
But, Mons, how can you say that? Don't you think that the golden mean is something very mediocre, created for the masses, and that everything great comes from, oh, I don't know, a disturbance, a breaking of rules, a surpassing of mediocrity?
Well, I think that all firm convictions are narrow-minded and prejudiced. All the same, I must realize that I have prejudices myself, against non-intellectuals too. One part of me doesn't want the prejudice, but my egoistic center is just delighted to have an opportunity to feel superior, and therefore it wants to stress the prejudice as much as possible.
Yes, Krishnan from India. Go ahead.
I think you're right, Mons. This is also the way the educated man in India feels. See, it's our biggest social problem. The laborer, for all purposes, is still a social outcast, just because he's uneducated. And there's a distinctive discrimination between those who can speak English and those who can't. The British did succeed in establishing the prejudice that no education is real or complete without the ability to speak English.
Actually, on this point, I think I've changed quite a lot. My old disgraceful prejudice against people who do manual work is very slowly changing. Because, well, rationally, I always knew that any kind of honest work brings honor to the worker. But I didn't feel that way, and I don't even feel so now, and I'm ashamed of myself, but, well, maybe the roots of this prejudice are very deep, too deep perhaps. However, I began to think that maybe one of the reasons why my country isn't as prosperous as it could be lies in this prejudice. And I think that we might give up some of our individuality for a while.
Well, the greatest prejudice I had before I came to this country was that the world in general was in a very happy state, that everybody was glad and there was no reason for worrying about anything. But now I'm beginning to realize how unrealistically peaceful it is in my country. I must laugh when I consider the fact that the greatest national problem we have had in Denmark for years was last year when we had to send a police force to the Faroese Island in the North Atlantic to calm down the native population. They demonstrated because a doctor at one of the local hospitals had lost his job. Yet that trifle was the theme of conversation in Denmark for weeks. I say I must laugh, but it's a laughter with tears in it when I consider the size of problems otherwhere in the world. In Korea, in Vietnam, in Algeria, in Germany, yes, even in America.
You mentioned America. Problems in America. I wonder what you would say the biggest single problem in America is, or is it unfair? Yes? Yes?
I have seen that the biggest problem in America now is segregation. But when I go back home, I'll tell my friends that it is not as bad as we thought before. The Little Rock incident had made me hate all the American people because I thought all of them have the prejudice against the Negroes.
Yes? Minu, what did you think when you came here on this subject of the prejudice in the United States against Negroes?
I had a sort of an idea that the government here appointed to kill Negroes.
Appointed, what? I'm sorry. Appointed?
Committees.
Appointed committees to
Yes.
kill Negroes?
To kill Negroes. I read about secret organization that wear masks and goes out to kill colored people. Now I have understood how much the stories about Ku Klux Klan are exaggerated. And there are just a few members of fanatics.
Well, we're awfully glad that
preconception got changed. Wait, just a minute. I want to come back to Saroj from Thailand.
At least I expected that I would see the white chase the Negro from the bus. And I really didn't expect to see a white dancing with a Negro. But now I have seen it, and it impressed me very much.
Marcella from Italy, yes?
I don't quite agree with you, Saroj. I think that you saw only the nice side of the problem. Because in Williamsburg, my roommate was a Negro from the South. And we discussed the Negro problem a lot. And now I think that it's not only a problem for the whites. Sometimes even the Southern Negroes themselves don't want to integrate. And, well, I think it's quite natural for some of them to be afraid and without pride. Would you work for integration if it meant that you might have your house burned down? And then, in other things, I think that the first Negro student to attend a white school must be very brave, really outstanding. I'm wondering, if the situation were reversed, would you white people be the first to attend a Negro school? And then I found that even here in the North, where everyone is in favor of integration, there is still separation. I've seen it, Saroj. In most of the schools I visited, and in the parties, except our forum parties, of course.
Of course, it wouldn't be possible in our forum parties, would it?
No.
Oh, yes, Susie? Susie from Brazil, do you want to come in here?
I just don't understand why color is so important. I guess it's because I come from Brazil, where we don't have 2 colors, but about 20, as a result of intermarriage. I've been told that here in America, if a Negro tries to move into a white community, they make it very difficult for him. Why? Because society is against it. Society is just a set of stubborn, narrow-minded little rules that nobody dares to change. Until people start breaking these rules heartily, complete integration won't be possible.
Yes, Saroj from Thailand.
But the people here are facing the problem, and they are trying their best to solve it. That is what I saw.
Yes, Bashir from the Sudan.
No, Saroj, I don't agree with you. At least I don't agree with the choice of your words. Americans are not facing the problem. They are aware of it. But as long as the majority are content to say that time will solve it, they are taking a negative approach. If the Americans are facing the problem, believe me, they will solve it. They have all the facilities, all the communication and education. In general, they have all the means to the solution. Please, it is not an easy thing for me, a foreigner, to accept the courtesy, friendliness, and hospitality I received all the time I have been here and say anything critical. But I appeal to you as an African, deeply concerned with the reputation of democracy in the world. You are concerned with the way the communists insist on this weakness of yours to strengthen their position all over the world. I think Americans have to solve this problem, and the generation to solve it will be you. After an experience of 3 months, I found that there is a deep spirit coming from the heart of the people. And this spirit will destroy the old feelings and prejudices. And this spirit will prove to the entire world that America is still a democratic country.
Thank you for saying that. Yes, Ritva from Finland.
I don't think it is quite fair to speak only about the prejudices in America when there are so many in our own countries that are very similar.
Yes, Faluke from Nigeria.
I was just going to say that, Ritva, that prejudice appears in different forms throughout the whole world. But I think it isn't something good because it ruins a country. For instance, in my country, where there are 3 different tribes, there is a feeling of mistrust, which of course is slowing down the movement towards a free federation of Nigeria. Actually, one thing I discovered about prejudice is that it is never based on logical facts. Therefore, it cannot be solved by reasons, but by educating the people concerned.
Quite true, Faluke. Yes, who's next? I can't quite see around the corner. Yilma from Ethiopia, yes?
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt, but from my own personal experience, I found that reasons do not always relate to facts. I've always been taught as an Ethiopian that I'm not a Negro. We are taught that the Ethiopians are the descendants from one of the lost tribes of Israel, and thus Ethiopians are rather of the Semitic rather of the Negroes. Well, because I learned this fact, when I came here I had the idea of isolating myself from the other African delegates, because I felt superior and rather different from them. But now, I began to see how much we have in common, if not in race, at least in our ideas and in our color. After all, we all of us are Africans. But now I see how much I was fooling myself. Well, excuse me, Ritva, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that when I came here, my only prejudice was against the Finns who speak Swedish. My cousin is engaged to a Swedish boy, and my relatives don't like it at all. Here in America, you always ask, would you like your daughter to marry a Negro? In Finland, we say, would you like your daughter to marry a Swede? Here I don't talk very much because I think that I ought to learn the facts and not rush into harsh judgments. But I really think that I have outgrown my prejudice against the Swedes. And this is something.
Yes, Swan from Malaya. Thank you, Ritva.
This is something that I want to say very badly. When I first came to USA, my prejudices were not only against the Americans. You see, I had many prejudices, and in some discussions on television in Washington, and during the time before that, I was very proud to be a Chinese. But now I am changed, and I thank the other delegates who are responsible for this. You see, they more or less taught me that I should be a Malayan and not a Chinese, and I exposed some of these prejudices in some of my whole schools, and I'm very glad to have this opportunity to clear myself now.
The same thing is true for me too. Actually, it seems to me that I almost can't criticize anyone anymore. Isn't that a wonderful thing to gain in 3 months? However, I'm still concerned about something I've noticed here, and it seems like a prejudice to me. That's the super-nationalism of Americans. I was quite surprised to find an old man who had come from Germany and who told me, you know, you're almost as good as an American. Why don't you come to live here? I was so stupefied I could hardly speak. How would you feel if you came to Athens and someone said, you know, you're almost as good as a Greek. Why don't you give up your American citizenship and come to live here?
Well, many of us in the forum group have wondered about that point. There must be a reason for it, don't you think so?
Oh, well, of course there must be a reason for it. But behind that national pride that seemed to me like, oh, intolerance and narrow-mindedness, I could see that these people didn't like the society in Europe that had rejected them and had a feeling of gratitude to America that had given them the opportunity to do something with themselves, even to feel aristocratic. And I think I'm quite ashamed because many of the Greek immigrants to the United States must feel the same way. And actually, I don't see how we can stand to create such an atmosphere for a great part of our population. I'm sure now, more than ever before, that we have great responsibilities to the people on whom we almost have to stand in order to ascend.
That's quite a change in you, Ike. The intellectual proponent of the elite that arrived here. But that still isn't more than half the answer to the question Mons posed, the question, why is there this supranationalism of the Americans? Do you think there's any reason for this same feeling in the Americans who are not recent immigrants, who've been here for a long time?
Well,
wait a minute, let Françoise from France.
Well, I hadn't thought about this until very recently, and it's something difficult to understand for most of us who belong to lands that are, I should say, as old as history. You see, when you learn your history, you learn about these people who came from everywhere here to be Americans because they found here opportunities that they didn't find in Europe, for example. When we learn our national histories in our schools, these people who came here because they wanted to be free and who preferred to be American citizens are mostly not mentioned at all. I had an experience similar to Ike's in a high school in the Bronx. I met a girl who had just fled from Hungary, and she told me how wonderful it was to be truly free. And here she could really she was able to become true what she had always desired. And I think these are the people who are more American than the Americans themselves, because they feel what American freedom is. And these are those who made me understand what American freedom was.
Well, it all depends on what you mean by real freedom. I don't know, freedom can become a burden if you get too much used to it. And so does the acquisition of any other right without constant research for it. When you're all happy and satisfied with yourself, what is the way to progress? And it has always seemed to me that you have to be very unhappy and dissatisfied in order to achieve and to attempt, first of all, and to achieve anything great. There's another thing that troubles me. Has religion here become so much a part of everyday life that it's too much taken for granted? Here, people don't seem to rediscover religion every moment, constantly, but just to conciliate it with all their other social activities. And the great problems of humanity, the problem of the existence of God, of the creation of the universe, of the real purpose of our life, don't seem to trouble people that much here. I remember once having spoken to a girl, a college girl, about these things, and she said to me, I had never thought of it before. I'll think of it tonight and tell you tomorrow. How unlucky she seemed to me. It seems that she had missed so much of the fun of life. But then she didn't realize it, so perhaps she didn't miss it. However, I think that some of us Europeans, degenerate and decadent though they may call us, are still far more concerned with the philosophy of religion than people here. And I'm glad for the mystic attitude and the great concern for the important problems of human beings that, it seems to me that still exist and burn in us in Europe and Asia.
Objections.
Why?
Objections. Speak for yourself. I think we have done with these ancient medieval problems. I'm sure there are far more atheists in Europe than there are in America.
Even so.
Well, but there is one thing. It has been so much alike in Denmark and America, and I have to protest about it. I feel so much a part of it, so much home in my host families and communities that I have not had a chance to feel I was in a foreign country.
Well, in summary, I would say that it has been of the greatest importance to me, and I suppose to many of us, to realize once again how values change in different social and historical environments. I've been thinking more and in a different way on this idea of the freedom of the individual. And for the first time in my life, I realize now that some people can find freedom in society just by filling the responsibilities to others and not in solitude as I thought before. Also, I had not realized the importance of America as a new country, a new world, where you can see the human evolution and where new wonderful things can happen, but also a decline be brought as well. I had not seen how our civilization in Southern Europe is declining and how better Americans are in some ways. I think Americans are so full of strength that they prefer to live rather than to play intellectual games as we do. And also, I've seen some of the disadvantages of the democracy, the danger of a leveling off of all people. But the most important thing for me was that I saw that there are so many beautiful things to see, to hear, to discover in life, that for the first time in my life, I'm now very sure I want to live. And in this way, I've gained an affirmative position to life, which I never had before. And I think it's the greatest gift for which I have to thank America.
And thank you for saying that to us, Ike. We're very proud of you.